In the following days, Lucas began to pay attention to something that had previously gone unnoticed. He began to notice how many times a day he agreed to things without really thinking, how many times he said yes automatically, how many times he hid what he really felt so as not to create tension. And the more he paid attention, the more he noticed the pattern. He saw that this wasn't just with big or important situations, it was with everything, with small everyday things, like where to have lunch, what series to watch, what route to take. It was as if he had stopped existing as a person, with his own opinions and desires, and had become just someone who responds according to what others want. One Saturday morning, Lucas went to a coffee shop near his house, a small and quiet place he liked to go to alone. He ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass by on the street. Next to him, two women were talking, and he didn't intend to listen, but it was impossible not to hear. One of them was telling her friend about how she had finally told her boyfriend that she didn't want to spend every weekend at his family's house anymore, that she also needed time alone. The friend asked if he had gotten angry, and the woman replied that yes, he had been bothered at first, but that after talking they had reached an agreement, and that now she felt lighter, more honest, more present in the relationship. Lucas listened to this with a strange attention, as if those words had been spoken directly to him. The idea that saying what you really want can create tension at first, but that in the end it brings lightness, was something completely new to him, something that went against everything he had learned his whole life. He always thought that avoiding conflict was the path to peace, but maybe, he thought at that moment, maybe true peace wasn't the absence of conflict, but honesty, the ability to say what you really feel, without carrying everything alone inside. In the days that followed, Lucas began to experiment with something different, something small but scary. He began to try to say no in simple situations where there wasn't much at stake, just to see what it would be like. When a coworker asked him to stay late to help with something that wasn't his responsibility, Lucas took a deep breath and said, with a slightly trembling but firm voice, that he couldn't that day, that he had other commitments. The colleague just said okay and asked someone else. There was no drama. There was no rejection. There was no abandonment that Lucas so feared. There was just a simple answer, and life went on. When a friend suggested watching a football game on Saturday, something Lucas never liked but always accepted, he honestly said he'd prefer to do something else and suggested an alternative. The friend accepted the suggestion without problem, and Lucas realized that he had spent years assuming that people would leave if he didn't agree with everything, when in reality they just wanted to spend time with him. It didn't matter exactly what they were doing. Each small no that Lucas said, each small opinion he expressed, seemed to remove a stone from his chest. It wasn't instantaneous, it wasn't magical, but it was real. He noticed that the weight he carried didn't disappear all at once, but was decreasing little by little, as if he had finally found a way to empty that glass that was always too full. Of course, it wasn't always easy. There were times when he said no and the person was bothered. There were situations where expressing his opinion generated an argument. There were times when he felt that old fear coming back strongly, saying that he was being difficult, that he was causing problems, that he would end up alone. But over time he learned that conflict wasn't the end of the world, that disagreeing with someone didn't mean the relationship was over, that people who really care about you can handle your opinions and your boundaries, and the people who can't, he realized, maybe weren't people he needed to keep so close. Lucas began to understand that spending his whole life avoiding conflicts hadn't protected him from pain, it had just changed where that pain happened. Instead of dealing with the momentary discomfort of a difficult conversation, he was dealing with the constant discomfort of carrying everything alone, of never really being himself, of living in a faded version of his own life. And he realized that this second option was much heavier, much lonelier, much more tiring. He began to practice something simple every day. Every time he felt the urge to automatically agree with something, he would stop for a second and ask himself what he really wanted, what he really thought. It didn't have to be a big statement. It didn't have to be a dramatic confrontation. It was just an exercise in honesty with himself first, before responding to others. And gradually, this practice became more natural, became less scary, became something he did without so much effort. Months later, Lucas was at work when his boss presented another idea that he knew wouldn't work well. But this time, instead of just agreeing, Lucas took a deep breath and said, calmly and respectfully, that he had some concerns about the proposal and if he could share his ideas. The boss was surprised at first, but listened. And in the end, they reached a better solution together. Lucas left that meeting feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt seen, present, real. He realized that he had spent so much time trying not to bother anyone, that he had become invisible even to himself, and that he was finally beginning to appear again, to take up space, to have a voice. And most importantly, he realized that the people around him hadn't disappeared, hadn't rejected him. In fact, some of them seemed to respect his opinions more now than when he blindly agreed with everything. Because in the end, the simple truth that Lucas learned, and that perhaps we all need to learn at some point, is that avoiding conflicts doesn't bring true peace. It only brings the heavy silence of things unsaid, of feelings unexpressed, of needs unmet. Real peace comes from honesty, from the ability to say what you think and feel, knowing that this can generate temporary discomfort, but that in the end it frees you from the constant weight of carrying everything alone. You don't need to agree with everything to be loved. You don't need to say yes to everything to be accepted. You don't need to disappear to keep people around. The right people will stay even when you disagree, even when you have boundaries, even when you're honest about what you want and what you don't want. And those who don't stay probably were never really there for you, but for the silent and convenient version you were representing. Today, when Lucas feels that old impulse to agree with something, he doesn't want just to avoid tension. He stops, breathes, and remembers that the stone that will form in his chest if he stays quiet is much heavier than the momentary discomfort of being honest. He remembers that conflict isn't the enemy. It's just part of living in a real and present way with other people, and that the only way to build true relationships where you really exist as a whole person, is to allow those relationships to go through difficult moments, through complicated conversations, through honest disagreements that in the end make everything stronger and more real. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt that weight of saying yes when you meant no, subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this every week, quiet reflections about the things we all carry but rarely talk about. You're not alone in this, and sometimes just knowing that can make all the difference.